Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Scottish Games Network podcast. I am Andrew, and with me, as always, this week is the main man, Brian.
Good afternoon.
And Ryan as well.
You forgot to mention YouTube sensation, but hello, how you doing?
Of course, yeah. YouTube sensation and Discord wizard as well, as we've discovered recently.
That's exactly it. You've got it there. That's my new Twitter bio right there.
There is an end to your talents then. Okay.
Yes, definitely. Like it happens quite abruptly. There's not a long list of talents, unfortunately.
Oh, you've done a good job of convincing us otherwise so far, I would say.
I'm incredible at lying. That's one of my talents.
This is why we let you lead the podcast.
Okay, so as usual, let's have a chat about kind of what's been occupying us this week. Leisure things, not so much work things. But has anyone been playing anything or listening to anything or reading anything or doing anything fun in particular this week?
Yes.
Anyone want to kick off?
Yeah, I've been inspired by our Pokemon episode a couple of weeks ago, and I went and picked up Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu, because I never did at the time, and it's an interesting experience. I don't know how I feel about it just yet. I've only just beaten Lieutenant Surge, who's the third gym leader, and essentially the big thing with this game is there's no battling in between gym leaders, so like you've got like your trainers that you'll bump into en route and gym leaders, and that's the only battles you have. But there's no random encounters. You catch Pokemon just by throwing Pokeballs at them. So there's no grinding.
Yeah.
Which sounds quite fun and seems like
I kind of forgot that one existed.
Yeah, so did I. That's why I'm only just getting around to it now. But yeah, I thought they're streamlining the process. This might be a lot of fun. You know, like cuts out that early game, especially like grinding to try and get up to like, you know, the level of the second gym leader or whatever. But I find that like, especially when I got up to Lieutenant Surge, I just found that most of my team was just under-leveled and there was nothing I could do about it, because I was like, oh well, I've fought everyone that I can do. Like there's nothing else I can do other than just, you know, pray that my team's gonna do well enough against them. But maybe I'll work out later on that there's a way around that and it's better, like it's better balanced than I think. But right now it's a different experience, I'll put it that way.
That would have been a fascinating one to talk about in regards to remasters, because that's
it's a Pokemon Yellow.
It is kind of a remake of that, right? Yeah, but in the context of Pokemon Go, right? They're kind of modernizing it in this odd way. Yeah,
the catching mechanic is the same, has been like lifted exactly from Pokemon Go. You know, like there's a circle around the Pokemon, and then there's a circle that's ever like shrinking, and if you can get the Pokeball in the shrinking circle, the smaller it is when you get the Pokeball in there, the better the throw is, the sort of more likely you are to catch it. And so that's where like the most of the gameplay comes from, is just like catching Pokemon. There was at one point where I was trying to level up a Growlithe and I caught 10 in a row just to turn them into candy. Because that's not morbid at all for a children's game.
Dear God, I feel old. Listen, unless Bulbasaur's in it, I'm not interested.
Bulbasaur is in it. It's a Gen 1 remake, so Bulbasaur, Charmander, Squirtle, all the good guys.
Well, that's fine. See, that's all you had to say. Okay, well, I will admit, hands down, I have been keeping it old school this week. I've not really been watching anything. I've not been playing anything that you haven't heard of before. Still sort of ploughing my way through Rage 2 and enjoying it. But I have been reading A Little Hatred, which is the new book from Joe Abercrombie, the guy who writes fantasy novels, which are like Game of Thrones, but nasty.
Is it Game of Thrones already nasty?
Oh, yeah, you've no idea. You know, he wrote the
nasty in what way?
Hatred of Kings, the Last Argument of Kings. It's quite political, a bit tortury, and somewhat bleak. And this new one focuses on a very different set of characters. So it's, you know, it's big, sort of multi-character. Again, a little bit like Game of Thrones, but highly, highly recommended. If you really like, you know, drifting off to sleep, just thinking about how mankind is a pestilential hellhole and that we should never ever leave the planet, it's got everything you could want and more.
Perfect.
Andrew, how about you? What have you been up to?
Fascinating. I went back to Solas 128 for a little bit over this week, just because it was niggling at me that I'd kind of gotten stuck, and I think having a little break kind of gave me the fresh perspective to get past the bit I was stuck at, but it's just gotten even harder. And I'm at this thing where the game is just so I love the atmosphere. I love when you work something out and you feel like you really went through the steps and had a genius moment. But I'm now at the point where I'm doing a lot of randomly placing things and hoping for the best. So I think I need to take a little break again and see. So we obviously talked about this before with the light bending mechanic. You're like placing mirrors and bending light around. And so far, a lot of it has been, static. You kind of set up the machine and you let it run. It's like a marble run where you put all the pieces in place, you fire the light in, and it goes. But I think I'm at a point now where you have to be moving the pieces as you go along. So maybe a piece that you used at the start where the light was going in, you need to then pick that up and move it further down the chain, and it's a lot. And you've got light coming from different angles, and then they hit each other and change colors. It's a lot. So I'm hoping that it's not above me, and that I will someday see the end of Solus 128. But at the moment, that seems a far ways off.
If you get stuck, we actually do know the developer, and we can reach him. If we can't get him digitally, once it's safe to do so, we can go and kidnap him, take him to the SGN studios, and force him to play it for you live. Solve the whole thing.
Yeah.
We could even turn that into next week's podcast.
There we go. Planning my content for me, Brian. Thank you very much. I was going to say, were you inspired to go back to Solus after Tom played at the Playaway Festival, which links us into our first news story?
I was. Conveniently, yeah.
Yeah, perfect. That's all I wanted to hear. We'll get into this week's news. We first of all kicked off the week with the Playaway Festival 2021 rundown. We all had a hand in this, so Brian, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, well, what can we say that you haven't already heard on the podcast, seen on YouTube, or read on the website? It was an incredible 2 weeks. The Tinderbox Collective need to be congratulated again, because they pulled together something that was fascinating, fun, it was playful, it was intelligent, it was imaginative, and it was really warm, friendly, and creative. We had live music at the beginning and end of every session. They had a closing party that was genuinely one of the most fun Friday nights that I think any of us have had for months. And, the talks, the speakers, the panels, everything kind of came together, and it really showed an awful lot of Scotland's gaming ecosystem that would never otherwise have seen the light of day. So big congratulations. And we just wanted to pull together an article that really said, thanks guys, let's do it again next year.
Yeah, definitely. We all have our own piece within that article where we spoke about the different things that we took away from the Playaway Festival and our personal highlights and what we liked seeing. So I think the best thing to do in this instance is, instead of running through it, is just tell you the link to that article is in the show notes. Go check it out. That leads us on to Tuesday's article, which was at 5 game studios based in Aberdeen, my hometown. I took a bit of pride in this one. I enjoyed this. You might notice if you read it, the first couple of paragraphs is just me rambling about Aberdeen. But it seemed to do alright. It seemed like people seemed to be quite shocked, like, wow, there's actually quite a few people up here making games, which is really nice. And yeah, like, it was cool for me just to see developers that I hadn't really heard of before, or didn't know what they were doing, and it gave me an opportunity just to look into that, which is always good fun.
So Aberdeen's Gamescom incoming.
Yeah, well, it's we've got 4TG, which I've been to. I think I only went to the once. I think it's ran two.
So what is that?
4TG is essentially just a local games convention that used to run out of the exhibition centre, but I don't know where they're going to be doing things now that we've got the big P&J Live. But essentially it was just they invited various influencers and people within games, so like students from Aberdeen University came up to showcase what they were working on, like, you know, so you could like get hands-on demos with games. There was also speakers from the world of YouTube and stuff like that, with like panels and stuff. It was essentially what you expect from any sort of convention, with like panels and exhibitions and like merch stalls and stuff. It was a lot of fun. They also ran a esports competition type thing, which was like a local team took on just people that signed up. So it was like, I think it started off as an Overwatch. I think it was an Overwatch tournament to start with, the year that I went at least. And yeah, just random people who had bought like tickets to specifically go and like compete against these guys did. So it was a team of complete strangers against sort of competitive Overwatch players. It was the eggheads of gaming, if you think about it like that. But yeah, right. That was so yeah. 40G is kind of the closest thing we've got to that. And yeah, it's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it.
Well, this proved to be one of the sleeper hits of the week when it comes to the SGN news, because so many people across Aberdeen and the northeast of Scotland picked it up and went, really? We've got games companies? Because I think, an awful lot of the focus in the region was on energy, oil and gas for such a long time. And finding out that there are so many and so varied a number of games companies, it was truly amazing, eye-opening. And I don't think people had appreciated that there are a couple of decently sized studios up there. You've got brilliant Skies, who do From the Depths, and you've got Firefly Studios, who do the Stronghold games. So there's a lot of people outside the Central Belt who are always happy to hear about new things going on with Scotland's games sector. So it was a great piece, well put together, and we're going to be replicating that across the rest of the country, because believe it or not, folks, there is life outside Dundee. There's more to us than Dundee alone.
The thing that really shocked me was I actually cut things from the article, because like I was trying to keep it a nice rounded sort of 5 people, like 5 game studios within Aberdeen, but there were some people who have studios and are currently working on stuff, or there was one developer who doesn't work on video games but works on board games out in, like up here, and that was really cool. So maybe we could even do a follow-up on other things in the Granite City. Who knows? If people want to see that, I'm always happy to speak about my hometown.
Well, look, this is the thing. 4TG is a great example. It's a homegrown show, and they had plans to take it out the beginning of last year. I wrote a big piece saying it was going to down towards the borders in the air. Obviously, that didn't happen with lockdown, but it was expanding out beyond its origins, and you're absolutely right. There's so much going on out there and across the whole of Scotland that very, very rarely, if ever, gets gets recognised. So, the discussions that we've had, 5 games companies in Edinburgh that don't make video games, but are doing really cool stuff with tech, or, it's what's happening out across the Highlands and Islands. There's some really, really interesting folk out there doing some really wonderful things. And as the champions of all that is great and good, as well as, mediocre and horrible, in Scotland's games industry, I think it's up to us to be responsible and step up and make everybody sound lovely. And obviously, once we had translated your piece out of Doric into, something approaching English, it seemed to do quite well.
Okay, who's your dues?
Don't start me. It's like Google Translate was not my friend when I was doing that piece. God. I mean, I'm Scottish, but are you people from Mars or something?
No, we actually come from underground. That's where Rube's Law Quarry came from. We actually burrowed from the ground up. We didn't mine from the surface down. That's where Aberdonians come from. Okay,
we're going to skip forwards just before we get threatening, emails and tweets and everything.
Don't worry, I'll translate them for you.
Brian, is this a death threat? I don't know. It just says fit. It's no, nobody knows. Okay, skipping forward, we then introduced a brand new piece of technology, Pure 4D, which was announced earlier this week by our friends at DI4D, the company formerly known as Dimensional Imaging. So they do the ultra high res facial capture with 4K, 8K cameras. You don't need dots all over your face. They just use really high resolution cameras and some very clever software to capture every nuance, every wrinkle, every stutter, every quaver, and every fleeting expression And they've been working in and around Hollywood, a lot of the big sort of blockbuster movies. If you've seen Blade Runner 2049, they did Rachel, the replicant, who, brought Sean Young back to life, in inverted commas. Not that, Sean Young is dead, but the character. Exactly the way she looked when Ridley Scott shot the original. But Pure 4D is now aimed very specifically at the games market, and it's been optimized to fit into the games pipeline, very much focused on the sort of the next generation consoles and the high-end games. So this isn't something you're necessarily going to see in the casual social mobile or online space, but the company have already worked on things like Call of Duty Modern Warfare. So it's only a matter of time, I think, before we see more Scottish technology being used in blockbuster games of the very near future.
Yeah, this seems to be the next sort of step past like what Uncharted was doing at the start of like the PS3 generation, where everyone was like, what, you acted out everything and that's now what the game is? And yeah, it's really cool to see that games are progressing to such a point where it's like, yeah, we can have full body capture and facial capture to like bring characters to life and actually sort of portray the actor's performance as well as we possibly can. And it also sort of validates the idea of becoming a video game actor. I don't even know if we should call them voice actors anymore, because so much of it is motion capture and facial capture and stuff that it's more than just voice. But yeah, like I think for a long time, like Nolan North spoken about it in the past, about how the reason he got into games wasn't because he was like, oh, I think that this is a great industry. It was more just that no one else was going near it, and he had a wife and kids to feed. So applying for every job going was the best way to do that. But nowadays, like, you do have like sort of Oscar nominated actors signing up to be in video games and stuff. So I think the further we go with this technology, the better it is for the industry as a whole.
Absolutely. We actually ran a piece towards the end of last year, or maybe around about the middle of last year, a whole video documentary called The Captured Actor, which our friend Ian Lawson put together for the Royal Conservatoire in Glasgow. We'll link to it in the show notes, but it really sat down with actors, with agents, with motion capture specialists, and looked at how performing arts students and graduates and actors should think about video games, not just in from film, but out into the Storytelling Centre at the National Theatre and a lot of the different performing arts hubs around the country. So absolutely worth a watch if you're interested. And yeah, you're right. It's as valid and as viable for actors to go out and make a living from being in high-end video games now as it was for them, to be an extra on the bill in a recurring role for 27 years when that ran. Or if you're Scottish, being in River City, God help us all.
Hopefully this means we're finally going to get LA Noire 2.
Oh, that's a good shout. Because yeah, people...
Rockstar, get on it.
Yeah, because the sort of criticism of that game at the time was the fact that they had to have actors like almost overact for their lying, because facial capture technology just wasn't quite up to snuff to do it justice for what the plan was. And nowadays, like especially with this technology here, it could be really interesting to see.
Well, I think we should pursue the Scottish angle and forget this Los Angeles nonsense. I think we should do LA Noire. We've been talking about video games that deserve a Scottish chapter or a Scottish instalment. LA Noire.
Very good, yes.
Boom! I sense a Twitter hashtag spat coming on.
Oh yeah, no, we'll need to get that done. Right, if I haven't added that to the announcement that this show's went live on Twitter, then everyone shout at me and we'll get that hashtag trending.
Splendid. Okay, let's jump forward. Andrew, the next one was yours.
This is on Games Jobs Live. So the busy people at Games Jobs Live, they now have a report about basically all across the UK they've spent all this time collecting jobs so that they can try and get students and graduates and people already in the industry into kind of better careers. They've been collecting all this information anyway, so they've put it into this lovely report that basically is giving us insight into what the jobs market is looking like in a broad sense across the UK. And so this was their first edition of that in March. And main takeaways, the industry is doing well, despite the fact that there's been a pandemic. I don't know if you noticed. Nearly 2,000 open positions. And the other interesting thing is that despite the fact that there is still this kind of London and Southeast England kind of centralization, it's becoming less over time. Like now more of the industry is elsewhere in the UK than it is in London, and that's kind of a recent development, so that's cool to see. So yeah, it's just kind of heartening news in terms of jobs. They're actually out there, people can actually get them, the industry's expanding
in every direction it can possibly whiz. And yeah, it's great news, the fact that there are so many roles opening up across the whole of the country, and Colin and the team at Games Jobs Live, which includes our very own Mr. Gordon,
it does. Disclosure.
In the interest of full disclosure, are doing a great job. So this is going to be a regular update that they're producing in terms of, look, here's a snapshot of the number of open roles. And that's really valuable data, because as time moves forward, we'll be able to actually gauge exactly how we're doing, exactly where we stand in relation to other regions and nations across the whole of the UK. So kudos to Colin. We can't wait to see next month's. And obviously, fingers crossed, if you're in Scotland, you're recruiting, you should be getting your jobs up on the Scottish Games Network site. Come on, lads. What's up with you?
So that leads us on to the case study with Luminal games, and I believe, Brian, this was your one?
It was indeed, yes. So as part of our ongoing series of case studies that we created in conjunction with In-Game, the Innovation Centre in Dundee, we looked at Luminal Games, a Dundee-based studio who you might know from their first original release, Big Crown Showdown, which came out, I think it was about 2017 or 18. And they're a really, really lovely bunch. They were started by a small team out of Abertay University, and they looked around for work for hire, any kind of projects that were on the go. Spoke to a lot of the studios around and about the sort of the Dundee cluster, so Dundee City out into Tayside and Angus, and picked up little bits and pieces of work. And since then, they've grown and they've grown. I mean, they've doubled their turnover and their headcount every year that they've existed, including 2020, which is no mean feat when you consider, pandemic, lockdown, all sorts of horrible things. And it's a perfect case study for how to grow a successful games business, because they've gone from, really small, really sort of doing what they can to survive, through to now when they're working on titles like Cloud Jumper, which is the next big piece of original IP. They've got another game in development that they can't really talk about publicly. I had an awfully interesting chat with Stuart, the CEO, about the game. I can't say anything, sorry guys, but it's going to be great, and it could be one to include on our list of games set in Scotland. That's pretty much all I can say. So, the team have done fantastically well as a company. There were so many really good bits I wanted to try and fit in this case study. It was, we were young guys, we were in our 20s, we decided we were a studio and thought, that's it, we'll be retiring millionaires by the time we're 30. And then a week later, we realised this is hard, which I thought, right, that's got to be the quote that goes up at the front. But they went out looking for work for hire because they thought this is the only way we're going to make money. And I really loved the pragmatism, because they said, look, we're going to have people pay us to learn how to make games. I was like, well, there you go. That is a fantastic approach, because they were making money, they were generating revenue, they were keeping the studio going, and at the same time, they were learning how to make video games. And it took them, quite a significant amount of time until they got to the point where they thought, actually, here we go, we can make our first original game. And they came up with Big Crown Showdown, and then had to, go and find a publisher and do all this kind of thing. Read the case study, because if you are a student, if you're studying video games, this is how you do it, guys. This is how you make it work. If you're running your own studio, if you've got aspirations to make video games, go and read the case study, because it really couldn't be any more of a lesson in this is what's important. This is how you do it. Stuart was quite upfront saying, when I started when we started the studio, I didn't have any business skills. I went to Business Gateway to go and learn about, payroll and taxation and all of the things that he didn't know coming out as a graduate. So I thought it was a fantastically good story, and I'm just delighted that we were able to work with the team at Endgame to get it out there and share it with the world.
Yeah, definitely. I think the main takeaway from it is that, exactly what you said, the quote, there's no substitute for hard work, is there? And I think a lot of people think when they start making games, it's like, oh yeah, well, I'll slap one together in my free time, and then, it's going to be #1 bestseller in the UK, and I'm going to be a millionaire by the end of the week. And it's not quite that simple.
Not quite.
They remind me a little bit of Mediatonic, in the sense that they are a company that have been doing things for a long time, kind of, and the nature of it being kind of collaborative works or work for hire is that, that their name's not really out there, but by the time that they're actually in the spotlight, they're basically a very experienced veteran, almost like team. So I can only hope that they enjoy the same kind of success that Mediatonic has enjoyed.
Yeah, Mediatonic
Mediatonic
is a great example. The other one is Rovio. Rovio, who are the creators of Angry Birds. Angry Birds was their 47th or 48th game, and nobody, not even the people at Rovio, can remember the first 47. But Angry Birds was the one that transformed them, and they've built on that and they've innovated on that, and they've used that success in a lot of different ways, some successful, some not so. But they're still there, they're still doing incredible things. And it is possible in 2021 to build and grow a successful game studio without having to have the multi-million-pound investment, or without having to be located in the heart of London. It's totally possible. And we have the talent pipeline. We've got 7 universities producing games graduates, 11 colleges producing, game development students with HNCs and HNDs. We've got a ton of talent. We just need to be able to turn it into viable businesses.
So, talking about striking out on your own, Mark Mccready from British Esports has moved on to do his own thing on the side, and I covered that this morning at the day of recording. It was the Scottish University's Esports Network. Essentially what Mark's doing is he's creating a space for society heads from across the universities in Scotland to get together to organise competitive gaming tournaments. And what this also means is, not only are you sort of seeing competitions between like Aberdeen University and Queen Margaret, but you've also got like the idea of, he mentioned that one of the reasons he started it was he is at university right now, and he plays Rocket League. He's a massive fan of the game, and he just couldn't find people to join a team with at Queen Margaret. He just couldn't find another 2 people to have a Rocket League team with. So that's also something that's being addressed with the network, is the idea that if you feel like you're the only person at your uni wanting to start a team in a specific game, you can be scouted and recruited from other universities to fill in the gaps, which is really cool. So yeah, like in his case, Rocket League, let's say RGU, we'll go with some hometown pride. I'm just really doubling down on Aberdeen this week. Let's say they were looking for 1 extra Rocket League player to fill out their team. He could be scouted, and that's really cool. That's just some really cool ideas. And we spoke to him on the YouTube channel about what that means for the sort of esports community as a whole within Scotland. And he was saying that by bringing all the universities together and having like official leagues or tournaments, teams that aren't quite as big as like the really big names, like Scalp, who are starting their own team and all that, can recruit and scout players from the university circuit before they start getting the sort of the big attention that they get from from bigger teams that can offer more money, which in turn just makes the esports scene more competitive, which is always a good thing. If you're watching any sport, then you want, competition and not just the same teams running away with it every year. Isn't that right, Scottish football?
Yeah. Okay, Scotland in competitive sports may not be playing to our strengths in the way that I think people might wish that we did. But when it comes to esports, let's be honest, across the whole of the UK, it's still emerging. Nobody's entirely sure whether it's a real thing yet. And by anyone, I mean the media. We all know that it's going to be huge, that it's going to be massive. And what Mark's doing is really admirable. It's connecting people together. And for a small country, we can sometimes have a few issues with communicating, collaborating, especially when it comes to video games. So helping players, helping esports, individuals and teams across the whole of Scotland has to be a good thing. It's going to draw people together. It's going to give them that little bit more visibility. It's going to help people realise where there's talent. And as esports continues to grow, this has to be one of the fundamental building blocks in making sure that we're, part of this and that we're helping players come through. So it's a great first step. We've got the universities, we've got the colleges. Let's celebrate it. Let's shout about it. It's not an area that the Scottish Games Network covered in the past because we didn't know what was going on. We weren't talking to people, but now we've got, as you say, we've got Skelp, we've got ADL, we've got Esports Scotland, we've got the Scottish Esports Hub. I spoke to those guys earlier today. There's a ton of stuff going on, so we're going to be shouting about it. We're going to be supporting it. The first Esports in Education Scotland conference happening next week on the 24th of March, I think, which I am speaking because I am a sucker. Anyone comes and asks me to speak at anything, and I'll say yes before considering whether or not I know anything about the issue. So I now have to write a presentation about employment opportunities and careers in esports. So yeah, there's going to be a bit of Googling going on this weekend, I think.
I think that's going to be quite an interesting talk, to be fair, because esports is growing exponentially, even just within the UK. And to mention a story that we reported on, I think it was the start of this year, the Dundee Stadium. We're going to get a dedicated esports stadium in Dundee, which is just insane and awesome. So yeah, I think esports is one to keep an eye on, even if you're not necessarily interested in watching them, just to see how it grows. Just seeing how a sport grows in popularity and then makes itself sort of relevant in sort of just day-to-day life is really interesting. We obviously, none of us were around when football started emerging and started becoming like a professional thing, or a baseball or whatever, but see, we're in a unique experience here where we can actually watch a sport grow on a global stage and see where it goes.
This is very true. And out of all of the games coming out of Scotland, out of all the studios, there's probably only one, which is Earthbound Games in Dundee, who are sort of focusing on esports-like titles. Is that going to change? Are we going to see more coming through? And you're right, the esports arena in Dundee is going to be quietly disruptive, I think. It could really sort of highlight an awful lot of opportunities, and obviously our friends at Abertay and Dundee and Angus College are going to be closely involved with that. So we will be shouting about esports, and we will be covering esports far more often in the near future.
And that brings us on to the latest story that's been up on the website, which was Scotland's new digital strategy, and I believe that was also yourself, Brian.
It was indeed, and I will put my hands up here and say, okay, this is not strictly related to games, but it's entirely relevant because it focuses on Scotland's digital future. And since A, we are in Scotland, and B, we do digital, it's absolutely relevant to pretty much the whole of the ecosystem. And so essentially, the Scottish Government's Digital Directorate have produced a new strategy for Scotland's digital future, making us a far more digital society. And it focuses on people in place, so the provision of high-speed broadband throughout the entire country, out into the Highlands and Islands, the rural and remote regions, whether it's fixed internet or full 4G, 5G, they have plans to cover everything. It's all inclusive, it's making sure nobody's left behind, that people have devices, and more importantly, the skill to use those devices. Now, this ties in very, very closely to the Logan Review, the Logan report that came out at the end of 2020, which proposed a root and branch overhaul of education for digital skills, plus the establishment of a national network of tech incubators, plus, revised funding and new funding opportunities for tech companies. Again, all of this is directly relevant to the games industry. So essentially, all I wanted to do was highlight, look, this is a really good move. It's ambitious, it's bold, it's transformative, and it's something that will set the scene for video games and the whole games ecosystem to contribute. You know, we have so many strengths that we can bring to the table as Scotland tries to innovate its way out of COVID and become a more digital society. Not just in terms of commercial success. You know, in 2020, the global games market was worth, $174 billion. It's projected to break 200 billion by 2025. And the upper limit is stratospheric. We don't know. It could keep going and going from that point. And the games sector does not need the big expensive upfront capital investment like film or screen does. You know, we don't need a studio. Gives a laptop and a decent broadband connection and we're off. So it's really important. It's really important that games can contribute, as I say, not just commercially, but in terms of how we help to transform education. Because games in classrooms is a no-brainer, surely. You know, everyone would far rather learn with Minecraft and Fortnite. Maybe how to spell Fortnite could be high up on the list. But I just thought it was really important to flag this up as a really ambitious, chance for Scotland to innovate in the future and become far more focused on digital. So, yeah, big flag wave from the Scottish Games Network. Well done, guys. We want to be involved. Give us a shout.
Oh, well, that wraps up the news for this week, or so far anyway, because this goes live on Saturday, so who knows, there might have been a million stories went up on Friday, and we'll cover it next week. But without further ado, we should get into today's main topic, which we kind of touched on last week, and we thought we might as well make it a full-length discussion, because it's a big enough topic that it's probably worth about 3 episodes of a podcast, never mind 1. So let's just get into user-generated content. What do you guys have to say on it to start with?
Well, so last week we were kind of talking about mods and remasters and things like that, and how that a lot of that tends to come from kind of community initiatives, right? So I think that was kind of what got us interested in this topic and thinking about it. And maybe a place to start with it is kind of the local angle, the Scottish angle, because there's been quite a few instances of them being successful here, I think. One being Blazing Griffin in Glasgow. Their kind of studio is built on the back of originally was like a mod of Half-Life 2 that they made the ship, and then have kind of spun that out into the stuff that they're working on now, but kind of building on that same idea. So there's definitely a pipeline from this kind of like user-generated content into building an entire studio that can then, they then employ people and things like that. Brian, you were saying that you often find yourself talking about this user-generated content as part of the teaching that you do.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that creators of all kinds have to be aware of, and it's not just in video games. If you're an author, then if you do something successful, the chances are somebody somewhere out there is going to write some fan fiction. And that could go in a lot of ways that you didn't anticipate when you created the intellectual property. And how you deal with that is very much up to you. Likewise, musicians. You've got mashups, you've got different mixes, you've got a whole lot of people out there who, again, if you're successful, will take your content, remix it, mash it up, throw it in, into the mix with something else. Is that a bad thing? Are they stealing? Are they, stopping you from deriving revenue from your work, or are they adding to it? Is it, this mashup culture that we have now that where everything's fair game as long as it's not necessarily being sold for commercial gain? But obviously in video games, since they are fundamentally a digital product, a digital content type, the tools that you use to make them can be replicated, back engineered, ripped off or shared and used to extend the life of that game. So if you go back to Quake, Quake came out and they very quickly, the guys at id made the tools available that they used to build the game so that people could go and build their own, build new levels, reskin the characters. And from there, it just snowballed. And to go back to, my own early years in the games industry, when Grand Theft Auto No. 1 came out, we were contacted by people across the world who were running fan sites and said, hey, we'd like to, write about this crazy video game that you've made. Can we have some stuff? And it's like, well, okay, what kind of stuff? Artwork? So I pulled together texture packs and some of the car skins, car models, bits and pieces like that, and sent it to them because it's made sense to me that you would support the people who wanted to say nice things about you. But again, this was based entirely on naivety because this hadn't really been done at that point. And before long, they had not only built fan sites and used official artwork and everything, they had started to build their own tools that in a lot of ways were superior to the ones that the poor level designers at DMA had to build the original game. And so within a year of the game coming out, despite not having released any development tools, people were reskinning cars and making their own maps and producing hover cars and mashing up Wipeout and GTA and doing the craziest stuff. And, there was this big discussion and debate going on at the time. I seem to remember, it was a long time ago, that BMG were a bit disgusted and a bit outraged and weren't very keen on this because it was their intellectual property-ish. Whereas we at DMA were a bit more, who's it hurting? They've got to buy the game in order to use this. They're not destroying the original intellectual property, they're just making more of it. So they're playing more of the game. Are we crazy? Does this sound... But of course, since then, more and more games have released the development tools just specifically to allow players to make their own models, make their own levels, create new content, because it keeps them engaged with the game for longer. And indeed, some games out there have come to rely on it as a fundamental part of their overall business model. And it doesn't necessarily have to be just purely for gaming. You can use game engines for a whole lot of other purposes. You can make music videos, you can make animation. The whole machinima kind of trend that was one of the biggest YouTube channels in the early days of YouTube. The term machinima was created here in Scotland, in Edinburgh, by a guy called Hugh Hancock, who was a real pioneer. Sadly no longer with us, but he innovated the use of using games engines for animation. So Rooster Teeth and all of the stuff that they've published in the last 20 years. Again, sorry to sound like a broken record, guys, but directly inspired by Scotland. Go Team Scotland!
Hey! I looked into this about fan animations and stuff, and obviously Red versus Blue from Rooster Teeth is sort of the big one, and they got 282 episodes out of Red versus Blue, and out of that idea of just making almost a comedy show, a comedy TV show, but in Halo, and just sort of record screen recording and getting your characters just to move their head up and down as they're talking, and it's a massive internet phenomenon, and anyone who's involved in gaming has at least heard of Red versus Blue, if not watched a few episodes, and there's people who've watched all of them. It's just it's quite an interesting idea to be able to make things in game engines. But building on that a little bit, just about how easy it is, how it's a bit easier to make animations and stuff using pre-existing stuff like a video game. I think fan fiction kind of ties into that, and about how, see, if you're wanting to start off writing, you're wanting to start writing creatively, sometimes it can be intimidating, especially if you're writing from a sci-fi or fantasy perspective where everything your world is just as important as your characters, and the rules of that world need to be solid before you do anything else. The idea of fan fiction really helps out people who are starting out, because the chances are you're not going to write fan fiction about something that you only have a passing interest in. So you already know all the world's rules and the likes, dislikes, flaws of every character. You've already got well-rounded characters to work with, and you just need to impose your story on it. And so it's user-generated content is often a really good place to start for people who either are just starting out or have limited resources, and they can just work with what they have and what already exists to make the thing that they want to do, which is just, it's always cool. And seeing more stuff is just great. The more options we have, the better.
Well, look, this is the reality. If you create something that's popular, your fans are going to want to engage with it. We're not in an age now where people are happy being passive consumers. especially in the games and digital world, where people feel as though they're part of this. But even out into literature, I mean, you're absolutely right. If you go way, way back, and I know this is going to be a cultural reference, so I'm going to check with you guys. Have you heard of the Bronte Sisters?
Yes, I have, yes.
Okay, just checking, it's like I have made some cultural references in the past that have completely floored you, but I know if I go back a couple of centuries, you're fine. Okay, good. So the Bronte Sisters, believe it or not, were big on fan fiction. So they actually wrote stories featuring Arthur Wellesley, aka the Duke of Wellington. So he was fighting the Peninsular War, fighting off Napoleon at the time, going off, being all heroic. And the Bronte sisters were totally crushing on him and were writing fan fiction with all of these big battles where he was the hero and everything. Mental, right? But it was fan fiction. And so this is the thing. It's called fan fiction because it's your biggest fans. It's the people who care. You should be grateful that you've made something that in this, content saturated world that people are engaging with. And if you'll give them permission, if you say, well, go ahead, guys, knock yourself out, very quickly, what they're doing is will outstrip your original. Now, let's look at Harry Potter. Now, whatever your opinion on the author, and there's a lot that has been said, but way back when, she said that, go right ahead, you're writing Harry Potter stuff, go nuts, just be respectful of the actors, because a lot of the Harry Potter stuff went in some very strange areas.
Yeah.
But J.K. Rowling is now responsible for less than 1% of all the Harry Potter fiction in the world today. She only wrote 7 books. There are some fan fiction authors who have, done 10 times that amount. And however questionable the content or however high or low the quality, it's a testament to the power of that universe, that franchise, that fandom that people want to engage. And count yourself lucky, I only mentioned Harry Potter. I'm staying the hell away from the morass that is Twilight, because, whoa. And one of the primary writers of Twilight fan fiction. Anyone want to finish this story?
Yeah, it was the writer of 50 Shades of Grey, wasn't it?
Ding! Yep.
Yeah, that started out as a fan fiction. Right, as much as we can make fun of 50 Shades of Grey, this is for the first time in my life I'm going to go and defend it. It shows, fan fiction has a place, right? Say what you like about the writing quality or, the story as a whole or whatever. It was an international bestseller and literally everyone in the world was talking about it at one point. So, fan fiction definitely has some validity, even if it is that particular series of books. But, I think it does go a ways to sort of supporting the idea of writing fan fiction and you can make something of it.
Mm-hmm. So this is my point, is that if you have created something that picks up a group of fans, if you have created something that people care about, they want to engage with it. And that's true whether you're a musician, whether you're an author, whether you're an artist, screenwriter, director, or a game developer. People will want to engage and make more. And giving them the tools, giving them the go-ahead is a smart thing to do. Because we've seen what happens with the alternative, where you get cease and desist letters, lawyers walking around Comic-Con, and everyone who's dressed as a particular character gets a cease and desist, photocopy that just says, no, this is our intellectual property, which seems like a very, very short-sighted and, short-term way of really pissing off your biggest fans.
Well, that's it. If your fans feel like every time they put hard work into something, you're just kicking sand in their face, they're gonna just start to move to something else, aren't they? It doesn't matter how much they enjoy what you made. Let's say Skyrim and Dragon Age. Let's say every time someone made something about Skyrim, Bethesda, shot them down and, told them to get in the bin. But then every time someone made something about Dragon Age, BioWare leaned into it and were like, yeah, go for it, knock yourself out, make things within our universe if you want. The people who are inclined to make that type of content will gravitate towards the latter rather than the former, because they're not willing to take the risk of, oh yeah, I can put, hours of work into this fan animation just for me to get a notification on YouTube saying I violated copyright and I've got a claim on my channel now. It's just, it's not worth it. So yeah, I don't ever understand why people get so riled up about like community generated content with their own stuff. Like, I get, obviously, anything that sort of kicks off in a way that, does get its own user generated content, you must have had to put a lot of time into it yourself. However, I always feel like, no one can do anything to the original. Like, let's say it is Skyrim. Now, I don't know how Bethesda are on user-generated content. Well, they lean into it, don't they? Because it's quite a big modding community. But just as like an example, if Bethesda were against it, yeah, no one can touch Skyrim. Like, when people go and buy it in the shop, it is Skyrim. It's not ever going to be anything else, no matter what someone writes or, mods or whatever. So I never understand why people are so against that.
Yeah. So Bethesda, I think is a really interesting one in that I think they are kind of pioneers in the way in that number one obviously they've supported it, but they also I don't know, it would be maybe not a few years after Skyrim came out, they briefly offered people making mods the ability to charge for their mods and for their fan creations, and basically the community cried foul and said this is terrible, and it didn't end up happening. I think that they were very much ahead of their time, because we've seen Valve do it, selling like the Black Mesa mod. There is definitely, there's so much people are putting so much time into this, and it's like real work hours, and it's nice for people to be able to get experience and stuff from making mods and things like that. But in a lot of cases, the companies are then taking some of this stuff back in and like bringing it into the, if you think of something like Overwatch, like they've obviously fed off of the community created stuff, and then that informs it. And there's some cases where the people's work is getting remunerated, but it's not always the case, right? So you would hope that there can be more opportunities for people to actually also, make a living doing the sort of fan generated stuff, right?
So there's a couple of really good points there, Andrew. One is that the whole relationship between unofficial fan-generated, user-generated content and official releases has got a bit of a patchy history in terms of, hang on, you can't charge for this because it was made by fans, as though that's somehow a differentiator, as though they shouldn't be paid for that.
Yeah, I was just wanting to interject with that and say it's funny that you should say that, because Sonic Mania, arguably one of the biggest sort of Sonic games of recent years, started off as a fan game, didn't it? Like, and then and that's still being sold today. It's not free, it was published by Sega, and yeah, that's because Team Sonic took the guys on board, but that's essentially a fan game. Like, it started off online as a fan game. And
we've got lots of examples.
Yeah, we've got
lots. Look at one of the most popular esports games out there at the moment, Counter-Strike. Counter-Strike started
Half-Life mod, wasn't it? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And we've had numerous examples. You mentioned Black Mesa, which is a frame-by-frame remake of Half-Life in the Half-Life 2 engine. And given the way that Valve are going, it's probably as close as we'll ever get to Half-Life 3.
Oh,
come on, fans.
We're official. We're official games media now. We've mentioned Half-Life 3. Now that's that.
That's exactly it. So but there are examples of mods and fan-created content which has led directly to not just the team being employed, but the game being commercialized and released. And Counter-Strike, I think, is almost a perfect example, which is, hey, we've got an engine, we're going to do something, repurpose it a little bit. It wasn't a ground-up redesign, but it did something different, and it did it well enough that it's still one of the most popular online games played today. And that was, 10, 12, 14 years ago that it was originally came out as a mod. And this is the thing, modding is a perfectly acceptable route into game development. If you're going out there and you're not learning, C#, C++, JavaScript, whatever, but you want to get your hands dirty, modding is a really good way to decide whether or not game development's for you. You know, I've got a stepson who's been doing an awful lot of modding and who has been teaching himself bits of Java, bits of scripting, just specifically so that he can go out and actually get his hands dirty and try and make, entirely new effects and entirely new spells for some of the games that he's really enjoying at the moment. And on the back of that, he's kind of gone, no, I don't want to go into games development, which, is totally fine. But for a lot of people, if you don't have a college near you, a university near you, you can still go on something like ModDB, which is moddb.com, and find a team who are looking for some help. And you don't have to be a programmer or an artist. You can ask them if they need some help with narrative design and writing. You can ask them if they're looking for any music or audio. You can ask them for whatever it is that your particular specialism, your particular skills or talents happen to be. But, I think it's a really rich and vibrant part of the games ecosystem that doesn't always get the recognition it deserves.
Yeah, I think we're skating around quite a big topic here in the sense that we're mentioning a lot of Valve properties, but we're not mentioning Garry's Mod.
Well, that wasn't intentional. We absolutely should, because Garry's Mod is the king hell granddaddy of all of the. Here's a tool set that lets you go and do some crazy things, so much and used in so many different circumstances to do incredibly clever things. We're talking music videos, we're talking fun animations, we're talking, plain straight up insanity, because you can adjust it and do almost anything to change and affect the world.
Yeah, no, I'm not too sure. I wouldn't say this is a hard fact here, but I'm pretty sure most game modes, if not all game modes on Garry's Mod, are user generated and haven't been touched by Valve. Your TTT and Murder and stuff like that, that's all user generated, which is quite interesting. And even within that, you've got user generated content that is fan fiction or sort of recreating something else. I don't know if you guys are aware of the creepypasta SCP, but
oh yes,
yeah, the idea of it's like a prison for monsters and stuff like that. And there's a Garry's Mod game that's actually had really quite a lot of fun. I think it's called SCP Containment Breach, and it's quite Dead by Daylight kind of inspired and stuff like that. But I think it was quite ahead of its time, because I think it was before a lot of those games and before even Evolve and stuff, where essentially one player will take control of the escaped monster, and I think there's 3 or 4 that you can randomly be selected to become. And the rest of you are soldiers sent in to sort of contain it. Mm-hmm. And the idea is you'll very rarely actually kill this thing. The idea is you're trying to just do some jobs around the facility to lock it down and then try to get out and close the doors before it can escape. But that's in a unique position where it's user generated content using a user generated content tool. It's pulling in stuff it's using assets from the source engine, which is associated with Portal and Half-Life and Left 4 Dead and stuff, and is creating something based on a popular piece of fiction online, which is it's really cool.
And again, I think there's a real audience out there and a real kind of culture around the whole idea of modding, and whatever source it comes from. And the SCP is a great example, because you can pull inspiration from wherever. And if you look hard enough in the modding scene, you'll find games that kind of take the fan fiction approach. And so they'll use a game engine, but then they'll set it in Westeros, or they'll set it in another fantasy setting from somewhere. I'm keeping my eyes open because I'm hoping like hell someone out there somehow has basically created Ian M. Banks's culture within a mod of a game that I own, so I can play it, obviously. But it's like, until we get to the point where we can get licensing and something cool done with this, there's a lot of creativity, there's a lot of real interesting ideas coming out of the mod scene, and the game sector has really driven this. It's pioneered it. It's by sort of saying, look, here's the engine, go nuts. It's opened the door and it's given people permission to go and explore and express themselves. And I would be really surprised if some of the well-known game designers, game developers that we have right now didn't get a start in the modding community, but are maybe just keeping quiet about it.
Yeah. I suppose we could just do examples all day, but one again, just for the Scottish connection that comes to my mind is Dan Pinchbeck with Dear Esther being another kind of Half-Life mod. But I think that kind of ties in. Yeah, well, and it ties into what we were saying. It's really, I think the fan fiction kind of like metaphor is like really strong about how you were saying, Ryan, about you don't have to kind of worry about the world building and stuff. You know, here's someone with a theatre background who, you know, has some kind of like technical knowledge, but having a mod and basically having all of that stuff there for you, and you can just focus on, I'm going to make a narrative game, and then in that, because you don't have to worry about the rest of it, can make something that basically pioneers a genre, essentially, like opens an entirely new door, and it's because you're building on top of something else instead of having to, you know, think from the beginning, how do I build an entire game to tell this story? You've got the tools there, you just put it to use in an interesting way.
Yeah, and I think that sometimes people associate fan fiction and user-generated content with low budget, you know, made in your flat, just on the cheap, you know, like in your spare time. But, you know, like Nathan Fillion of Firefly fame, that is the television program and not the studio based in both London, Connecticut and Aberdeen, is he created a fan film where like he's a massive fan of the Uncharted franchise. And there's this really great, I think it's about 10-15 minute long fan film where he plays Nathan Drake. And, you know, so like that's really cool. And I think that was his way of trying to campaign for getting the role, but it still counts as user-generated content. And I think it goes to show that you don't, like, it's not necessarily just, you know, people who don't have the budget or, you know, are just making it for a bit of fun that can make user-generated content. It can be a valid sort of approach to getting a foothold in whatever industry it is you want. And that, you know, goes for like voice acting or whatever. If you find like someone who's making a mod and like they need new NPCs, then like voice actors can get involved, and narrative designers, and like there's just quite an awful lot of range in user-generated content for people to get a start in the industry.
I think there seems to be a bit of prejudice about it, as though by using somebody else's technology or by using somebody else's IP, you're not really creating something. And I think we kind of need to nip that in the bud, because creating a game is creating a game. You know, if you go back to the dim and distant prehistoric past when I started, game engines didn't exist. You know, it was everybody at the start of the game, the first bit of the project was building the engine to run it, because this was pre-Unreal and pre-Unity. You know, if you were lucky, you started something just when Criterion Renderware was available on the market, and then, you know, EA acquired them, and it kind of became a bit behind closed doors. So using somebody else's game engine should not be seen as somehow less worthy than developing on Unreal or Unity. And then similarly, if you're doing something and you're releasing it but it's not for commercial gain and you're sticking it out on ModDB, is that different to releasing a free-to-play game on the App Store? You know, it depends. It really, really does depend. And if you look again at some of the examples, that games company started off as a student team, and they did a little online Flash game called Flow. I thought it sucked, but, you know, Sony clearly saw something in it, because they took them in-house in the Santa Monica studio and said, you are now our official That Games company. So, you know, that worked. And the team at Valve again, who did Portal, it was originally a student game called Nabacular Drop. And Valve saw it and kind of went, ooh, that's quite nice. Yeah, I think we need to kind of get over the idea that somehow modding games or making your own user-generated content is not as creative or not necessarily as valid as going and starting from scratch.
You know, just going back to Portal there for a second, the reason that Portal looks the way it does and it's set in the Aperture Science facility was because they borrowed assets from Half-Life. Essentially, if you look at the original Nabacular Drop, it was like you were in a dungeon and you were saving a princess, or you were a princess. I can't remember the specifics, but it was quite fantasy sort of inspired, and everything was quite like redstone walls and stuff. And the reason that they changed that aesthetic when they moved over to, like, when Valve did take them over, was because they didn't have the budget to say, we're going to make all these new assets and all these new textures and stuff. So they decided to shift the story and change it to something that would be similar, or would have similar locations to something that they'd made already. And that's why they went with Portal being set in the Aperture Science Facility, is because, they already had the stuff for Black Mesa Science Facility, so it's not exactly as difficult to move over. Which, so like, if Valve can do it in-house, then why can't we do it out with,
Portal is a particular favourite and a particular example I use a lot, because it's an exercise in, constrictions. There's one human character in that game, and it's a first-person game. The only time you ever see her is if you walk past something reflective. The only other things that you get there are the turrets. You get a companion cube. It's a box with a heart on it, right? It's one of the most beloved characters in video games. Exactly so.
It doesn't say a line of dialogue.
GLaDOS started off as a text-to-speech synthesizer because, again, budget restrictions, time, etc., etc. But it's the writing, it's the creative direction of that game that takes it from a confusing 3D puzzler through to the recipient of however many Game of the Year awards it picked up.
Mm-hmm.
It was dozens. So it's a thing of joy and a thing of beauty. But that's sort of getting off the topic ever so slightly.
Ever so slightly in the sense that I think the fact that they were able to lean into those other aspects of Portal, like the narrative side of it, that was the thing that set it apart, was probably, a product of the fact that they didn't have to, they had the extra kind of space to experiment with that kind of stuff. Again, in the similar ways to what we were talking about, because there's so much of the work was done already, you can kind of, you've got that extra kind of pipeline or whatever to use. So I don't think it is totally unrelated.
Quite a good phrase that I like to use a lot when it comes to sort of making anything is restrictions don't limit creativity, it sort of broadens it, in the sense that, like, if you start a project, let's say, I mentioned that earlier, trying to write like a fantasy story. Starting off writing a fantasy story, you have to spend so long trying to come up with like all the different rules for your world and everything, and you've got so many options that you're probably gonna miss a lot of good ones that you have, or good ideas that you have, because you're glossing over them and trying to think of something else. Whereas, like, if you've got a slightly limited scale to that, whether that's like budgetary or like in terms of, if you're making a mod, you can only use the assets that are there. You're forced to think in a more creative manner in order to get what you want and sort of make things work in the way you do. And by doing that, you often come up with more creative ideas.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. It was way back at DMA Design, Gary Penn, who was the creative director, had a program for the testers to help them learn game design. And he would give them weekly challenges, with things that were ridiculously constrained. Create a game that only uses one button, create a game that only uses two colours, and it forces you to think an awful lot more creatively. And it's if you don't have mad programming skills, or you're not a really talented artist and you're using, these are the assets I've got, it can help you to sort of find a new way of approaching things, or you have to be a little bit more innovative and creative. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. And producing something that uses other assets. If you remember back when Flappy Bird came out, it went insanely popular, totally viral. And one of the criticisms was that he's just stolen graphics out of Mario. And it's like, I don't remember him ever, what was it? I'm not even going to attempt the pronunciation. I don't think he ever claimed that it was all original. It was a nice, simple little game that he kind of threw together. But we can sometimes suffer from a little bit of snobbery when it comes to the game sector.
And the thing is, as well,
we've got the whole real games thing.
Well, the thing is, as well, what I was going to say was just, you can't say that, even though, it's got the pipes from Mario and stuff, you couldn't look at Mario and Flappy Bird side by side and go, he's just copied the game. Like, you'd be a moron to think that that's what he's done. Yeah, he's copied the pipe design and everything, but other than that, and maybe like the background looks kind of similar to World 1-1 sort of Mushroom Kingdom aesthetic, but you know, he made an independent game that was maybe not wholly original, but definitely unique enough to make a break for itself and, you know, sort of explode onto the mobile scene.
Yeah, well, what is original out there? You know, if you're doing an RTS game, then you're ripping off, you know, June 2000 or Command and Conquer. If you're doing a tower defense game, if you could patent game ideas, game concepts, we would have one first-person shooter. We would have one racing game. You know, thank God we can't. It's how you take a core mechanic or a control system and how you innovate with it, you know, within that particular constraint. So, yeah, I think, again, we tend to find that far too often we're dismissive of particular types of game or particular platforms or particular approaches because they're somehow not real games or it's not real game development.
The thing is, it's not even, like independent developers or modders that suffer from that. I think, remember when Overwatch came out, people were speaking about how, it's just a TF2 clone. It's just, because it happens to also be a hero-based shooter with objective-based gameplay. It's a TF2 clone. And, you know, looking back at it now, it's quite ridiculous that people were saying that, considering it was a game that near enough defined the generation in terms of, you know, multiplayer online shooters. And for that initial response, you know, it does just, I think it is just, it's very easy to rile up the video game community. And I think the problem is, the snobbery is exactly, you hit the nail on the head, Brian. Like, some people just go, that's not a real game because it's not what I'm thinking I want right now.
Exactly so. And it's, how can I put this? I'm trying to find a way to be diplomatic yet respectful. It's fucking stupid is what it is.
Yeah,
right?
No, I'll give you that.
Mobile gaming is killing the games industry. Is it? Is mobile, you know, home taping is killing the music industry? It's nonsense. The games industry is bigger than it's ever been. The games industry is constantly changing and evolving. The one constant in the video game sector is change. But a lot of people seem to want a return to the golden days, which presumably was the late 90s, early 2000s, where if you wanted a game, you had to go into a shop, buy it in a box. And we didn't have this filthy, non-dedicated platform nonsense with mobiles and smart TVs and streaming. Streaming's never going to work. Streaming's not the future of video games. For a sector which has been constantly changed by technology, not just new platforms, new business models, new revenue streams, new audiences, new ways of engaging and playing, we're really bad at spotting the future trends. And it's, remember when VR was going to be the future of video games, we were all going to die because we would be locked into our little headsets? Yeah, that's right around the corner, guys. Right around the corner.
Oh, everything's a way to go very Sword Art Online in a minute, I'll tell you.
I can't wait. Bring it on.
I think if anything, it's kind of the opposite, almost the opposite way around it in some ways. And you know, we're having this discussion about like mods and fan created content, and you know, there's the kind of fear from companies that maybe it'll undermine the value of their thing or something like that, or they'll end up losing potential revenue. But it happens the other way around all the time. And you know, obviously, like an example, like PUBG again, something that was a mod originally, I think mod of
Arma 2
maybe.
Yeah, I think it was Arma.
But and made from just assets and stuff. I mean, obviously PUBG did very well, but in 10 years' time, the things we're going to remember are Fortnite and Apex Legends and the various other Battle Royale games. And PUBG's historically important, but it's not the one that made the most money, and it's going to be... And that's, you know, do they think twice about taking someone else's idea and using it? No. So, like, you can't kind of have it both ways.
Well, that's it. And Fortnite really pivoted as well, because if you remember when Fortnite first came out, it wasn't free to play, and it was sort of like it was almost Left 4 Dead in the sense like you had 4 players working cooperatively, and you built a fort or you defended a fort. It was almost like a third-person shooter tower defense game, and there was like zombie type things that came to attack. And then when, PlayerUnknown's Battlegrounds did so well, they built that as a tacked on free-to-play thing because the game wasn't selling well, and they wanted something to get themselves back in the limelight. And, that, I think it worked better than they ever thought it would, because now people only know about the free-to-play bit. But if Epic can sort of borrow ideas, exactly, Andrew, why can't the rest of us?
I think again, there's numerous examples, and there are so many ways in which pretty much every developer has utilized ideas from somewhere else. You'd only have to look at the genres again and see that, okay, you can still take a match 3 game and do something clever and creative and innovative with it. It was when Unreal Tournament came out. It was, oh my god, I can't believe they've just cloned Quake. But very quickly people played it and went, actually, this is really cool. And, there were a whole different range of weapons and different kind of capabilities, but within the first-person shooter genre. Well, and it was an arena battle. So, I think as an industry, we're too prone to being swayed by the playing population. It's like, oh my god, this is an outrage. No, it's not. Let's calm down.
The first-person shooter genre started out as being called Wolfenstein clones, and then it was Doom clones, and now it's arguably the biggest genre in gaming. Like, if you ask someone, on the street that's never played a video game to name one, the chances are one of the first ones they're going to mention is Call of Duty. And then it's the same with open world crime sandboxes. Oh, they're all GTA clones, but then look at where, Saints Row, you could argue the first game was very much aping on that kind of format, but then they went in their own direction with it, and then you can't say that Saints Row 4 and GTA 5 are the same game. You just can't. Very, very different titles, but they started with a similar premise of, an open world sandbox that you can do whatever you like in, and let's face it, if you give a gamer a space where there's lots of squishy civilians and fun guns, then what are they going to do,
Well, if you give people the means to produce something, to create something, then you have to be aware that at some point, possibly measurable in seconds, somebody is going to make something objectionable. There's an industry phrase called time to cock, which is how soon after we put this tool, forgive me, into the hands of users, is somebody going to create an enormous penis? And it is normally really, really quick. If it's not the first thing that's created with this new tool, then it's going to be one of the first 5. You can absolutely guarantee it. But this is one of the risks when you look at putting the means of production in the hands of the proletariat. It's someone is going to make something filthy, possibly objectionable, and then within a very short space of time, racist.
Today we have been covering user-generated content, and unless you guys have anything else significant to add, I'll take that as a no.
Always.
Always.
Just try and stop me.
Oh, well, what we'll do is we'll set up a wee live stream for you, Brian, and that'll just always be running. And you could just, come in and out of shot every so often and just tell us something about
and another thing. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we'll do that. We could do that, yeah. No, just always live on YouTube.
Definitely. I would say that I'm definitely interested to hear what everybody else has to say, though.
Yeah, 100%. So yeah, please, if you have something to say about this topic, let us know. Get in touch on Facebook, Twitter, skywriting, whatever you personally want to do to contact us, then feel free. Yeah, we're not difficult.
Leave your feedback in a Doom mod.
Yes, do that. Make a mod. Oh, please. Do you know, is Happy Wheels still a thing? I remember people used to make Happy Wheels levels for specific YouTubers and stuff they liked. Just, if you want to do that, if you want to write notes in the background of Happy Wheels levels, I'll throughout next week I'll keep searching SGN and Scottish Games Network on the levels to see if there is one. But yeah, like, please feel free to get in touch and tell us what you think, because this is quite a big topic, and it is something that we've not covered everything. We're not going to claim that we've covered everything. So if you have a topic that you want us to discuss further, then let us know as well, and we can always get round to that after we speak about all the other topics that we've mentioned today.
It would be good to like include people's responses and things like actually on the program and talk about them and stuff, right? Like have a more kind of circular, we hear our own opinions all the time, so it'd be good to hear what everybody else has to say and kind of include some of that, because especially on the Facebook group and stuff, we do get some like good comments, so like the more that we can incorporate that, the better. I think would be really cool. Yeah,
definitely. We're going to create user-generated content on our podcast. There we go.
This is it, guys. This is it. We don't just want this to be all about us. We want to hear from you. We want to hear whether you think user-generated content is a good thing or a bad thing, your favourite games which have used it, reasons why you don't include it in your own games. Do you think that modding is actually a valid route into the industry, or should we look down and spit upon filthy modders because they're not real game developers? We would love to know more, because this is just us all chatting. Now, admittedly, being as long in the industry as I have, this is rock solid, 100% true, set of data and facts that you're receiving this afternoon. But we know that the games industry has a lot of different opinions, and we would like to hear yours. And unless it is truly ridiculous, we promise probably not to mock it live on air. But yeah, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, definitely. So, speaking of user-generated content, actually, we should head straight into the spotlight this week, and I thought we should mention Wallmaster on TikTok, our very friend of the show, Ali Lowe. Now, the reason I wanted to mention Ali is because I don't think he speaks about his TikTok very often. I think I only came across it because he shared a video of it on Instagram, and I don't think it said anything about that it started off on TikTok, so we're promoting it here. And he did something throughout January where he 3D modeled a new thing every day, and he made like additional things to go with his Zelda statues, and so I was like, that kind of ties in with user-generated content, and anytime we can promote the terrific work that Ali does, then we're going to do it. So yeah, go check that out. It's Wallmaster on TikTok. Link will be in the show notes, or just search WALLMASTER. That wraps up the Scottish Games Network podcast for this week. As always, we've been your hosts. I've been Ryan.
I've been Brian.
And I've been Andrew.
Thank you ever so much for watching, and we shall see you next time.
Take care, folks. We'll catch you on the next one.